Hey everybody, welcome to BrickVault. Today is a very special LEGO collection video. I'm finally taking the time to go through all of the minifigures from Classic Space. Those of you that are active members of the LEGO community most likely know Classic Space quite well, at least peripherally, and most people vaguely aware of LEGO certainly recognize these classic LEGO Space minifigures. Now, technically, the term Classic Space isn't an actual name of a subtheme, it's just the space subtheme, but once things started getting a little bit more intricate and varied with aliens and different planet scenarios, the original and somewhat simplified version of the theme that came out that really got it popular is so reveled and so revered that it is just called Classic Space, so that's what you've got. And it's also one of the first original themes that came out once the minifigure was implemented back in 1978. So I think it's pretty safe to say that if you didn't have the LEGO minifigure, you wouldn't have had any space themes. Before, it was all system and city themed sets. Well, I shouldn't say all, but I also shouldn't get too sidetracked by the actual collection video here. I'm going to be going through every single minifigure from the Classic Space theme, tell you what sets they came out in, and how much they are currently worth on the brick buying and selling market today. So before I jump into the very first figure, I do want to say that if this minifigure display case looks cool, we sell these at our web store, www.brickvault.toys. It's a great way to help support the channel, and there are also instructions for very high quality, very detailed LEGO models that you can build as well. That's linked in the description below, and let's jump in. So we're now looking at this red and white astronaut. This is the year of the Sony Walkman being first released, as well as the first time Happy Meals and McDonald's was a thing, and now LEGO Space minifigures. For the first 3 years, all space sets just had red or white astronauts. You couldn't get them in different colors. And these two figures are incredibly common. And when I say common, I don't just mean that they came out in 5 sets or 10 sets. According to Bricklink, the white astronaut in the course of almost 10 years came out in 37 sets, while the red was in 46 different ones. To my knowledge, no other figures really come close in terms of being repeated throughout a variety of different set releases. So in that aspect, I'd say these are probably some of the most common figs of all time, but that doesn't mean that they're easy to get in good condition. Remember, this isn't the time when people were really collecting sets like they do nowadays. In fact, the idea of collectible figs even being a collector item didn't really start until maybe the Star Wars sets came out in the late 90s. So when going through different sellers in the aftermarket, you can find chewed and kinked and messed up versions of these guys all selling for $1, sometimes less. But if you want to get one of these astronaut figures that isn't cracked up or yellowed by the sun or something like that, you'd be lucky to get either one of these guys for $20, and many of them sell for over $30. Now, over the years, LEGO has re-released old classic minifigures, including some of these astronauts, but there are some distinctive features that make these guys actual old Classic Space figs, and there are certain ways to be able to tell the difference. A lot of you guys might already know that the shape for their helmet isn't the same shape as the extremely common and well-known minifigure helmet that we know today, but instead it's actually a little bit more cylindrical, not quite as round, and the chin in the front is a little bit thinner and would break very often when kids would play around with it. The Benny character from the LEGO movie calls attention to this, and actually, even though there's those divots on the side, there was no visor piece developed for this helmet. It didn't exist back then. Part of me wonders if that was just part of the manufacturing mold and they had divots on both sides, and then eventually in the late 80s when they decided to make visors and redo the helmet, that became the jumping off point to actually fit a visor on the side. When you see me put a visor on the old helmet, it doesn't work really. It's a little bit offset. And even when the LEGO Movie 2 brought back some of the figs relatively recently, the mold is meant to look kind of like the old helmet mold, though they have actually reinforced that chin strap, still making it slightly different. Also, this is another distinctive feature just in general for these older figs. On either of the arms, you can see the seam, the line where the two different halves of that mold came together, and that edge is a little bit sharp compared to figs that came out 10 years later. It's not like that for 100% of the old arms that are molded, but if you have that cut cutting line on the arms, it is definitely an indication that it was made a very, very long time ago. I've got one of the sets here that at least the red astronaut came out in. There's a full review on this set, but this is just an example of the classic space theme. It's got the old gray, blue, and trans yellow. Now, technically, there are slight variations of this figure from the first year, 1979, and there was basically just one odd release, one strange variation for a single Lego set that came out, the Command Center set, and in there, instead of having the printed Classic Space logo on the front, you had figures with no print on the torso, and then stickers that you'd actually have to stick onto the chest. According to BrickLink, or the collector's market, you choose to put the stickers on or leave them off technically make them different figs, so they did make the figure without a print, and then here are the figures with the stickers attached. The white sticker version of this figure was also released in the two-man scooter set, and these guys are extremely rare to get. There are no new versions of either of these figures listed on the second-hand market, so that means the stickers just never stayed in good condition, and if you wanted to buy a sticker set on its own, it's like $40 or something like that. There's only one store selling it in Germany, and I know I spent quite a lot of time on these first figs here. It was a little bit more of a history lesson to get you guys started off, and we're going to get through the rest actually pretty quickly. 1982 just had a yellow version introduced. It's a little funny having the yellow skin tone and the yellow spacesuit sort of match up. Frankly, I don't think it looks that bad, but also the white outline for the Classic Space logo does not pop very well, or contrast very well, I should say, against the yellow backdrop either. This figure came out in just 3 sets for its first year of release in 82, but over the course of the next 5 years, it appeared in another 25 different sets. Perhaps it's just a popularity contest, or maybe people don't like the yellow figure as much as the blue, red, or white, but this is maybe $20. You could actually get this in perfect condition for slightly less than that if you go to the right place, but we're jumping forward a couple more years, and now we have the classic blue and black minifigures for Classic Space in 1984. In my mind, the most classic of these Classic Space guys feels like the blue one. I think the logo just pops best on his chest here, and he's priced around the same as the red and white figs. You'd be lucky to get him under $25 in new condition. Remember, that is just in new condition, still very common if you want to get them chewed on. Now, the original Classic Space fig in black, he only came out in 8 sets. The blue guy came out in 12, and it's hard for me to fully say why or how. I'll speculate in just a second, but this guy is more collectible than the other Classic Space figures. There are only 2 stores selling him in brand new condition, the first one selling for $50 and the next one selling for $170, and I could not tell you exactly why. I know there is definitely less iterations of him. Even the bad, messed up versions of him where he's all chewed up, you still have to buy him for like $3 or $4 in the worst condition possible. But part of me speculates it's not just the quantity of this guy, but when you look at the different sets that he came out in, he almost feels like a precursor to the very, very well-known and popular Blacktron series, because the Blacktron original figs were pretty much all black. He kind of looks like that, but he and only he appeared in sets where ships actually had a different color combination, so officially, unofficially, he could be used as an antagonist within the Classic Space line, but it was just never explicitly said so. Perhaps I should have paid homage to him when I did the Blacktron episode a while back, but yeah, maybe unofficially he is kind of like the first Blacktron fig, or at least the first antagonist within the space theme. Quick anecdote with all of these original guys here before I jump to 1985 is that the gold printing in particular for these guys, when you're looking at all these figs here, was very easy to fall away. There was something about the print or that paint, and it just didn't stick quite the same way to the rest of the body. And I think it was because they were double printing layers. It printed white onto the chest and then the gold on afterwards. And something about that process just didn't work. So when they're worn away, it's usually a white planet logo with a bit of the red still left over and none of the gold. Also, this isn't exclusive just to Classic Space, but the last distinctive feature of these figures that makes them slightly different is when you take the helmet off, the actual shape of the minifigure head here is a little different. It's a little bit less rounded by the edges, and there's also no open stud hole at the top of the head. It's just a flat stud. The head evolved a couple of times throughout the years, but this is what the original one was for quite a long time, and now we're in 1985. Technically, nothing new came out in terms of a print for a different type of fig, but the white astronaut in a single set got this new neck bracket mold piece. It basically indicates a jetpack and maybe some communication antennas, and I especially like the little offset light stud in the front. This fig appeared in the Solar Power Transporter set, and this particular jetpack piece molded in blue is the only time it came out in this color. There is one store selling one used version of this guy on the second-hand market. Just to give you guys an idea of the rarity, he is listed as 35 bucks. And honestly, this is one of the cases where you're probably better off just getting the entire old set if that's what you wanted to do, because it's honestly not that much more to get a used version of the entire set that he came out in. Also from that set is our next fig. It's technically not a minifig, it's a brick-built robotic figure. He and others like him are just called Classic Space droids. They never had names or were assigned specific functions, and he's just a fun little side creation that you can attach if that's what you like. It's easier to just put all of his pieces into a wanted list and buy him that way. Buying him pre-built doesn't really make sense. He's probably just a couple of bucks, and the same goes for the rest of these brick-built robot droids. Each one of them just came out in one set each. You'll notice a pretty common combination of pieces that make up their bodies. There's at least a through pattern as to how a lot of them are created, with 1x1 bricks and studs on all sides and antenna pieces with levers, except for this guy in all black that has an antenna for a head. This one droid figure came out in two sets, actually, not just one, and I suppose is slightly cheaper to build. All of these pieces that you see that these droids are made of are still pieces that are produced today. And then jumping to the last year for Classic Space, we have a yellow figure with, once again, a jetpack. This time the jetpack piece is molded in the old gray. He appeared in a minifigure pack. The distinctive feature for him is that he actually has these cone pieces in black. There are no new listed versions of him on the second-hand market, and getting him used is gonna probably be $13 to $15. It's really hard to tell what kind of conditions these guys are in. I'll jump back to the minifigure pack in a second, but the other version of the yellow figure came out. He's got the trans red cone pieces in the back of his jetpack. He appeared in the Mobile Command trailer little set, and just like the other yellow fig, there are no new versions of him, but used he's minimum of $20. And the only difference is that he's got those trans red cones. So that kind of just shows you how weird and incomplete some of the second-hand market listings can be. In the same set comes the second version of the black Classic Space fig, also with the jetpack. His little cones in the back are yellow. He's listed somewhere around 20 bucks used, and if you wanted to buy this little set, the minimum listing is like $60. Now, jumping back to that minifigure pack I mentioned earlier, there were a couple of new droids introduced. One is almost exactly the same as the black droid we saw earlier, only he's got gray and a little bit of red. And then this droid actually has one of those printed 1x2 tile pieces. It's no longer a produced print anymore. Slightly more expensive to get this guy just because of that one little module on the front. And then by far we have the silliest and worst looking droid in my opinion, this blue one. It appeared in the Solar Transmitting Cruiser, which is kind of an interesting set. And maybe I didn't mention before, but any of these droids that have the blue arms, this particular piece isn't really molded in blue anymore. They basically just made it for these droids and maybe one or two other sets outside of that. So that is like the only rare piece included for any of the droids, is these arms in blue. Guess what? That is it for the Classic Space collection. I know they made several later updated versions of these guys, but none of them came out in the Classic Space sets. So this is what I am considering the full and final complete version of all these figs. Estimating prices for this collection is pretty difficult considering the variability of all these old figs, but I'm going to approximate roughly $300 if you wanted to get each of these guys in the newest condition possible. Anyways, this is just a fun historical collection that I wanted to show you guys. I'll be putting it back in the vault now with the rest of the space figs. And remember, if you enjoy our content, you can always like or subscribe. You can share the video, check out our web store. Any of that stuff is always greatly appreciated. And thank you so much for watching. If you got another Lego collection idea in mind, let me know in the comments below. And we'll see you next time at BrickVault.